Welcome to the Dr. Wyatt Show. I'm your host, Dr. Wyatt Fisher, a licensed psychologist specializing in couples counseling. Today we have a special treat. We have two guests today, not just one. And today we're going to be talking about how to heal from trauma. And today I have with me the therapy brothers, Tyler and Brandon Patrick. They're therapists who specialize in sex addiction, betrayal, and trauma healing. So welcome, both of you, to the Dr. Wyatt Show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Wyatt.
So before we jump into the topic, I think it's always nice to hear people's backstory to see where you're coming from. So if you guys could just share a little bit about who you are, what got you into the field of mental health, and what made you, specialize in the focus areas that you have.
Why don't you start, Brandon?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. I'm the older brother. I'm not the good-looking one, but we actually both ended up in the exact same field where we work with betrayal trauma. We work with affairs, sexual addiction, and then other forms of trauma. My path is a little different than Brandon's, but we both ended up in the same place. I have kind of a personal path through some significant trauma as a child and then some addiction issues as well. That then led to getting a degree in marriage and family therapy, my master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and eventually working in the realm of recovery and healing from those things.
Yeah, super.
Yeah, my story, I actually give a lot of credit to Tyler. He's the one that kind of, he pushed me in this direction a little bit, and I had no clue what I was going to do with my life. But I knew I loved people. I knew I wanted to help the world out in some way. And, I just followed my big brother's lead. So here I am. And since then received a lot of training in addiction recovery work, but also in treating trauma and healing trauma. So now both of us have our own clinics where we do a lot of addiction recovery work. We work with couples and relationships, and we do a lot of EMDR and ART and trauma treatment modalities along with our retreats that we run. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, great. Nice to have both of you here. So this whole topic, how to heal from trauma. Trauma is a word that's thrown out so commonly these days, and sometimes it can be overused, maybe sometimes underused, but maybe we can start with defining our terms. How do you both define the word trauma?
Well, so you're absolutely right. We can throw trauma out there for anything. Any life experience that we've had, we could call it trauma. I like to separate it out. There's big T trauma. So that's the big events in our lives that our brain really remembers. So if I get in a car accident, that's a big T trauma event. If I have a parent die or something like that happens, big T trauma. And then there's the little T trauma, and that's a bit more subtle. It can be a bit more underground, longer lasting. So let's say I have a dad who's just kind of emotionally shut down and not connected to me. I can't really pinpoint the event that's traumatic, but I can say I have some life experience that's really affecting me in my life. And so I would call that little T trauma. And so if you can separate those out, you can kind of start to look at your own life and say, okay, what are my traumas? Like what has really affected me now as an adult and affecting the results that I'm getting in my life now?
I think another quicker answer to that too is just the way we look at trauma is, obviously we live in a world that is a trauma-filled world. Every one of us is going to live our lives and somehow not get out of it unscathed. And I think a trauma can be defined as something that alters who I am or how I see myself. So it could be anything that's small or big, but when I'm the one who gets to take a look at those things, it's the work in looking at those things that matters more than even the definition of trauma, if there's something that has changed me and the way that I am.
Mm-hmm. So what are some examples of trauma that people can bring into their marriage that impacts their relationship?
Past relationship trauma. If you were in an abusive relationship, then that would definitely be some trauma that you're bringing into the relationship. Major attachment wounds. So as a child, if you had some major attachment issues and attachment wounds, abandonment, neglect, abuse, those type of things will absolutely affect how you're attaching to your partner now. And I could actually go on and on. There's so many things that affect how you show up in your relationship now.
I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of couples when they come in for, like, say, couples therapy, and they're thinking they've got communication issues. A lot of times they work on just the communication issues, and they don't understand that both partners are coming from such different backgrounds with different perspective and different life experiences, that a lot of those things that my partner does are things that they don't even know that are triggering off certain parts of me that I haven't even made peace with yet. And so they never get to that lower level of understanding one another, and actually the background and the history and how we've come to see the world as a result of those things that we've experienced.
Sure. Yeah. So what would be some steps partners can take to discern how much do I have trauma from my past, and how much is that trauma influencing how I'm showing up in my marriage?
You got to work backwards a little bit. So your relationship is a great reflector of how unhealthy you are. And so if your relationship's a mess and you're struggling and you can't empathize and there's not much intimacy, there's a lot of secrecy, that's good feedback for you. That's good feedback. But a lot of times what we do is we turn to our partner and we say, you're the problem. You cause all my suffering and all my pain. And so if your relationship's really struggling, if you have the strength to ask the question, is it I? What is it about me that's bringing to the table here in this relationship? Then you can start to examine why you show up the way that you show up in that relationship. So you start to get conscious of how you're responding and how you're reacting. And that's the first step to kind of realize I might have some stuff in the background here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's maybe like a literally kind of a small formula that we kind of work from a lot of times when we're dealing with trauma. And one of them is just starting to identify what those things are. And in a relationship, sometimes the gift is that my partner reflects those things to me because of the hot spots we find in our marriage. And when I find a hot spot, something that kind of, like, you could call it triggers me or lights me up, it's an opportunity for me to look inwardly and say, what is it about this that's causing me to be lit up that way? And, the way that we know how trauma works is that a lot of times we have something happen that overloads our brain so much that we can't actually fully comprehend what's going on. And then it kind of becomes disorganized, and then it feels scary and out of control, and it activates those parts of our system, the fight, flight, or freeze parts of our system to help us survive, so to speak. Now, the great thing about that system is that it helps us survive, but it also inhibits our ability to think clearly. And so what Brandon was saying about working backwards is that when we have a trigger, the first thing we want to do is learn how to ground ourselves back first, where we can get our prefrontal cortex back online with the limbic system that's firing off from the trigger. Once we do that, then we start to become curious with, what is this that's going on? What happened in my relationship with my partner here? And how is that tied to how I see the world or some of my past experiences? And once I can get curious about that, it then offers me a chance to then be compassionate to myself first and actually gain understanding of why I'm feeling the way that I am and why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. But then it also gives me a choice. It gives me access to choice again to then make my next decision instead of just reacting because of the trauma that was there.
Mm-hmm. So if, let's say, you go home tonight, your partner does or says something and it makes you so upset, it really hurts your feelings. In that moment, how much or how can you discern, is this my partner's fault with what they just said or did, or am I just getting triggered from my past? How can you tease that apart?
That's a great question.
You've got to have some emotion regulation skills. So in that moment when you feel the shame, the fear, the fight, flight, or freeze response come up, what do you do in order to regulate that? And so, something as simple as go for a walk around your house 3 times and breathe. Give a little bit of time before you respond, and get back into that part of your brain that you can bring some rationale and logic in along with those emotions. That's where you need to start, because then you can start to actually look within. But in that moment, you're ready to attack, you're ready to flee, you're ready to do whatever you can not to be in that situation. You're not going to be very effective. So you got to start with your emotion regulation skills before you get to any of like your deepest, darkest trauma in that moment with your partner.
I could, I'll give you like a little personal example of that, if that's all right, Dr. Wyatt.
Sure.
You know, you will understand this being in the mental health profession, but you spend your time trying to help people all day. Listen, you might come home a little bit fatigued. I walked in the door recently and my wife had a really rough day and I wasn't quite in the right space to like hold all of that stuff yet. I hadn't really processed my own emotions yet. And so I wasn't giving her the response that she needed in terms of showing empathy and understanding and listening. And she called me on it. But the way she called me on it was she said, Tyler, it's no wonder. I don't even know why people go to therapy with you because you don't listen. Right. It's like, okay, so for your question,
why would you get defensive around that? I don't understand.
She went for the jugular right there.
Yeah, right. Well, and what that means is that she's also hurting, right? Because she's feeling something about what I just did tripped off something in her as well. So the work to that is that for me, I have two responses going at the same time. The first one is my shame response of, oh yeah, I have this history of needing to like perform for everybody and need to be good enough for everybody and need to be a good enough husband. And so that part gets hit in me and that's where my shame kicks off. And for me, I feel that my head starts to drop. I get this pit in my stomach. Everything wants to close in and I either want to fight back or I want to disappear. And then I also have this part of me that's like, that's just her asking for some help. I got to figure out what's going on with her. So for me, what I'll do is I'll try to take a break, what Brandon just said, and I might go run my dog. It's a real blessing to have a dog in a relationship because you can always take it for a walk if you need a few minutes.
It's a good excuse to have a break.
Yeah. So you go run the dog. And while I run the dog, I'm grounding myself. I'm breathing. I'm doing some emotional regulation exercises. I'm asking myself, what is it about what she just said that's partially true? And what's true is that I wasn't listening in that moment. And then I can step back in when I get home after I'm grounded and then go to her and say, hey, I think what you're trying to say is that I'm not listening to you and you need me to listen. I'm here. Next time you ask it, you could ask it in a different way and I'd be more available. Right. But now I'm just taking that time to get grounded so that I can get my choice back.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking that space to get out of fight, flight, or freeze is so essential. When something happens, when you have a rupture with your partner, your brain kind of goes into overload and you're in a fog and you can't quite think straight. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of couples keep interacting and then damage is done. So I'm a huge advocate also of just calling out flooded, taking that break, 20 minutes, up to 24 hours if needed, that long, just so you can clear your head and get your heart rate down to really sift through what was just happening, what was I feeling, what were they feeling, and then come back when you're calm and try to talk it out.
Yeah. So
when we're getting triggered, that is, what I see a lot of people do is it's kind of all or nothing. Either this is all my history of my trauma and has nothing to do with my partner, or this is all my partner and has nothing to do with my history. And so what I find working with couples is often the truth is somewhere in the middle. Usually what your partner is doing is hurtful and anyone else would think it's hurtful also, but the degree of your reaction to it is probably intensified because of some trauma from your past, if that's applicable to that person. What are your thoughts on that of kind of this all or nothing experience a lot of people have where it's all my trauma, nothing to do with my partner, or it's all my partner, has nothing to do with my past?
I think the answers are often found just like you're saying, Dr. Wyatt, in what we call the middle path, or I was trained in a type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, and dialectics is basically the idea of two things that are in opposition but both have truth, and it's really about finding the middle path where there's this balance in taking accountability for what I can, because that keeps my freedom and my power, while also being able to surrender what's not mine. And then the question is this something I need to bring up with my partner or not? Right? If my wife says those things to me that I just said, some of the time I'm going to get done with my walk or whatever, and I'm going to go, I can take my ownership for my part, and I don't really need to see anything to her. Other times I'm going to feel like, no, I'm going to resent her if I don't say something. So now I'm probably going to need to take ownership for my part, and also maybe say, hey, next time, if you brought it up differently, we could have a different conversation. Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that somebody's ability to discern reality and be present is very important, because every emotional response that I have is not a trauma response. We have our emotions for a reason. They're there to protect us. They're there to help us. And, if my dog is running toward a busy highway and he is going to get hit and I get freaked out and I yell at him and I run over, that's good. That's all good stuff. But in 5th grade, I had a dog get run over right in front of me. I remember the sound. I remember the car. I remember the date. I remember everything about that.
Oh, wow.
And so if my dog's running at a park and there's not a busy street next to it, but I'm freaking out because there is a street, then I'm in a trauma response. I'm living from the past versus the reality of my dog is running toward a highway. And so that's why groundedness and mindfulness, and when Tyler talks about DBT, it's all about getting to that wise mind to be able to get present with the moment so that you can choose to act effectively. And a lot of times with our trauma responses, what we need to do is act opposite to what that response is telling us. If it's telling us to control, we need to let go.
Nothing goes well when there's active resentments in relationships, and almost all long-term relationships have resentments. That's why I've trained a team of relationship coaches to help you heal your resentments. To learn more, check the link in the description.
If it's telling us to run, we need to sit. If it's a trauma response, if it's an actual emotional response for our protection, then we need to act on what it's telling us. And so if you have a lot of past trauma, it's hard to discern that because you're always in that fight or flight. So working through that trauma from your past is important so you can be more effective in your life.
Brandon, one skill to go with that is this something we call checking the facts. So when I have that big emotional response, I need to take enough time to be able to check the facts and ask the question, does my response fit the facts of the situation?
Yeah.
And if it does, then yes, I'm just going to continue to move forward with some compassion for myself in the actions that were already there. If it doesn't fit the facts, then that's when maybe that opposite action takes place for the sake of doing some rewiring and showing that I can trust myself to take care of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the phrase, if you're hysterical, it's historical. Right.
Oh, so I like that.
It's a great thought. Yeah.
I'm going to steal that from you, Dr. Wyatt.
Yeah. I didn't make it up either. I heard it from someone else and I thought, man, that's a great phrase. If you're hysterical, it's historical. Again, meaning if your reaction doesn't warrant the crime, right? If the penalty doesn't warrant the crime, then there's a good chance you might be getting triggered from your past.
Yeah.
One thing that I've found helpful with that too is checking in with other trusted people in your life. And if you check in with them and you're able to share with them, hey, this is what's going on in my marriage, and this is my reaction to it. Do you think I'm overreacting? If you have those kind of people in your life, or if you don't, it could be a therapist or a coach you're working with. But I've also found that's helpful to get objective, third-party feedback to let you know, maybe I am overreacting. Because I think if you're the one with the trauma, sometimes it's hard to know. Am I reacting in a way that's influenced by my trauma, or is this really reasonable how I'm reacting? So that's one thing that can help, I think, too, in addition to what we're talking about. And I use this skill called the Reunite tool for conflict resolution. And one of the steps in there is you're supposed to think about, is the way my partner is making me feel, does that remind me of any feelings I've ever had from my past? So it's an affective bridge. And it's really interesting helping couples work through that, because 9 times out of 10, there is something in the past that's resembling what they're feeling in the marriage. And the phrasing I encourage people to use there is, I acknowledge I'm bringing a sensitivity to this topic because of X, Y, and Z. Because if you're on the other side of someone with trauma, that can be really difficult as well, because it can feel like you're getting overblamed and over attributed to a lot of things that you feel like you're not doing. What do you guys recommend in those situations?
I love your skills, Dr. Wyatt, on that ability. There's a couple principles in what you just said is that the person who recognizes they've got some past history as being vulnerable enough to give that to their partner, which is in a sense, an opportunity to give connection back instead of it feeling like an attack. And then I also think that what you said about the partner that's seeing these over and over again gets to realize that they don't have to be responsible to fix everything. And that a lot of times it's not about fixing or doing something different as much as it is a simple acknowledgement or the ability to offer presence back be a witness, so to speak, in a sense, be a witness of that history that's been there, because part of the reason why that historical stuff is there and still coming up is because for a lot of people, it hasn't been validated or witnessed in a way that the brain and the body has been able to process it to say, okay, like I can move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
What about you, Brandon?
The two things you just said, if you make a phone call, you talk to somebody about it, or even say it to your partner of, I'm aware and acknowledge that I have this history, you're actually saying it out loud. And that's one skill to get grounded, is that you're moving it from that just protective, instinctual part of your brain to a more conscious part of your brain. And as you do that, then you have more power to choose how you're gonna step into it. Really quickly, I'll give you my 5 A's. Awareness. You're aware of the trigger. You acknowledge it. So you've mentioned that twice, Dr. Wyatt. You then accept it. You accept it non-judgmentally. I'm not bad because I feel this. I accept that I have this trigger and I have this past. Once you've accepted it and you're aware of it, you then assess what you want to do with it. And Tyler was talking about that earlier. And then you either act or you act opposite to it. And so you walk yourself through those 5 A's, and you can choose whether you want to respond in that trauma or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because this absolutely happens a lot in marriage and long-term committed relationships, where both partners bring most likely some level of trauma to the connection. And I've seen it happen. It's happened in my own relationship and couples I work with, where the reaction does seem stronger than what's warranted. So obviously there is some trigger happening, but then learning how to manage that trigger, learning how to help the person who's getting triggered become aware that they're getting triggered, and helping the person on the other side of that learn how to respond to that trigger. Because yes, obviously if you feel like you're getting over attributed to a behavior that's not all your fault, it's difficult to stay in a compassionate place.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah. What do you recommend to partners in that position where they're married to someone who has significant trauma in their past, and a lot of times their partner's lacking that awareness and the trauma is getting blamed on them when it's not all their fault?
Go ahead, Tyler.
Okay. Yeah. So a couple of thoughts that are coming through me as you ask that question. It's one is that emotional response that comes up when the trigger happens it's like a wave in the ocean, and it's going to rise and it's going to fall. And if you're a partner that doesn't understand how waves work, if you dismiss the wave or try to fight the wave or try to stop the wave, what you actually end up doing is getting it to curl over right on top of you. And then you end up just getting buried underneath it. So understanding that my partner's response is coming from a different place allows me to not take it personal. It also allows me to validate the feeling that's there without actually taking ownership for the thing that's coming up sometimes. So now I can stay in the presence with you. I can ride the wave with you as you navigate these feelings. The challenge in a lot of relationships, and it depends on who you are as a partner, is that you can't get too defensive and say, hey, this is all your stuff. You also, can't go overboard and be like, here, let me hurry and fix everything. And so that hard space of balancing, I see you, I see your feelings, I know that they're legitimate, and boy, there's some things that could really help with this, and I really want for you to go and pursue some help for this. Mm-hmm. Right. It's giving the both and again.
Yeah, that's really helpful. What about you, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, same thing Tyler said. I'll probably just say it a different way. Your own boundaries are so important, knowing where they stop and you begin. So I'm not going to take personally your emotions and all your stuff, but I love you. And so curiosity is just a magical tool. If I can be curious with my partner, and I can be curious with them because I have those boundaries, I can hold that space, I can dive into some empathy, then I become an explorer with them. It's not against me. We're not fighting this out. I'm helping them try to figure out what they're feeling and where this is coming from. And they're going to feel loved and supported if I'm strong enough to have my own boundaries and know who I am. So yeah.
Yeah, this has been a growth area for me in my own marriage through the years, because I've shared this elsewhere. When my wife and I got married, she had significant sexual trauma in her past that she brought into our marriage. that didn't get activated until we got married. And as I'm sure you both know, often trauma doesn't get activated until someone feels secure so that it can rise. Yeah. And so it rose strong. And I did, in our early phase of our marriage, I responded poorly, because all the blame was coming toward me. She was not interested in anything sexually, and I was the high libido partner. And so anytime sexual discussions or sexual activity got brought up, there was a avalanche of anger toward me and rejection toward me. So in our early phase, I responded poorly to that, and it took me a while, and we went to therapy to work through the trauma. But what I learned eventually was, this is her trauma. I need to make sure I'm not making it worse. Yeah. And in the early stages, I was making it worse because I would respond with defensiveness and I would get angry in reaction. And then it just compounded the trauma, and I became a contributor unintentionally of the trauma as well. And so I had to really learn that skill set of, okay, this is her trauma. I need to hold the space, not take it personal, and try to provide compassion so that, Tyler, what you mentioned, that wave, it's a wave that comes and goes. And so what I was doing in the early stage was just making that wave worse, which would then crash down. But if I can learn to hold that space for her and be sensitive and compassionate without taking all the blame, even though that's how she felt, then I could kind of ride the wave with her and help build trust through the trauma. And so that was a huge, huge issue for our marriage for years. And through therapy and through receiving a lot of help, that was the major growth area on my side, which helped her finally see me more as an ally than an enemy in the trauma.
And I love what you said there, Dr. Wyatt, with being able to do your part to help things go right, but you're also offering your wife a gift by not taking ownership for having to fix it all. To be there as a co-journeyer with her for the things she's working on is a way better approach than having her blame you for all of that stuff, and you, in order to try to fix it in the short term, take ownership for all of it. And then it never lets her actually have to look at some of those things and say, wait a minute, there's some things that aren't quite right with me. And now you're supporting her. She could feel even safer to go and do whatever some of that trauma work is, whether it's some formal trauma work with EMDR or ART or something, or even just have a safe place to land with you.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Because when I was in the early stage of reacting to it and getting angry and defensive, the blame was all on me. But the moment I was able to hold that compassionate space for her, she couldn't blame me anymore. And it forced her to finally see, like, whoa, I have some stuff from my past. This is not just him that I'm bringing to this because he's showing up differently. So now I can't keep pointing the finger and not taking ownership for my part. Yeah. Okay, guys. So moving forward, for all those listening right now, what would be like one or two top takeaways you would encourage for people who are married in committed relationships, whether they have trauma or their partner has trauma? What are some just like top nuggets you want them to just mull over and think about over the next week or so?
I think our expectations really cause problems. So we get in a marriage and we think, well, we're going to turn into some Disney prince and princess and everything's going to be wonderful. We'll live up. And if you can shift a little bit and think of marriage more as a great opportunity for growth together and learning, then I loved your example, Dr. Wyatt. It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Your wife's trauma has given you an opportunity for growth. It's given your relationship an opportunity for deeper connection and intimacy. And it's all because of some pain and some struggle. And so we can, and this is going to sound kind of backwards and weird, but we can be grateful for the trauma. And together as a couple, if you help each other heal and you navigate that, your own individual trauma together, and you're going to feel really bonded, really connected. And so that's my little nugget.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. Right. What about you, Tyler?
And I would just add back something that Brandon shared earlier, those 5 A's. If that's a skill set that can be learned in any given moment, can be used over and over again, 30, 50, 100 times a day if needed. Become aware, acknowledge what's happening, accept that it's there, assess what your choices are, and then either act or act opposite inside or outside of a relationship. That's something that can be done. And then Brandon and I are both really big proponents of each of us in a relationship doing our own individual work. And I can tell you just from my own personal experience that the work that I've done in my own trauma, whether that's been inner child work, or the biggest factors for me have been things like EMDR or ART, have made a massive difference in my ability to show up inside my marriage, because I've been able to take care of some of those things that were mine to begin with in the first place. And so being willing to look at yourself and do your own work is going to help you to be the right kind of partner inside of your marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super. So if the listeners wanted to learn more from you guys, what's the best way for them to connect with you moving forward?
Our podcast is called Real Talk Recovery. So you can find it wherever podcasts come out, Spotify, iTunes, and our website is realtalkrecovery.com, right, Tyler?
That's right.
Yep.
Super. Well, thanks again for being on the show. I appreciate it. All of your insight and your ideas around trauma. I know people are going to really appreciate this episode. So thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Wyatt.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Wyatt Show. For my free resources, click the link in the description. And remember to leave a review if you enjoyed this show today, and share this episode with one other person. And remember, your marriage is alive. If you care for it and nurture it, it will grow. But if you deprive it and neglect it, it will wilt and die. The choice is up to you. Take care.